So I'm going to touch on how we fragment the fragmented self, the disassociated self, the suppressed self. So imagine that as children, we're happily going along on our timeline. Everything's fine. It's what we know to be normal. So we're the natural child. And then something happens as a catalyst that causes us to suppress our feelings, to lock away trauma, to actually have gaps in our memory. It's like there's a blank space. I don't remember anything around the age of 5. That's because there's suppressed memories. And so how that occurs is that to, in fact, let me just say that they have a saying that children are resilient. They're not. None of us are. What we do is we suppress, we fragment, we dissociate. And so to do that, we have to keep the feelings at bay. And so our emotions, whatever it is, let's say my mother died when I was 5, and so my life is now completely chaotic. I'm moving around, living with other people, everyone's traumatized. And so I still have to get on with life because the adults make me. So I'm going to have to suppress all of my emotions because it's too painful to deal with. And to suppress those emotions, I'm going to have to use some of my willpower, which is my belief. And that willpower belief might be no one cares about me, I'm not good enough, or whatever. And so that's going to wire that feeling into my brain. But I'm also going to have to use some of my natural life force that is going to keep it suppressed. So those three things will hold and anchor in a belief in my body and a belief in my perception of life. And so I'll continue going through life and continually fragmenting or dissociating as things occur. And when that happens, eventually I'll get to a place, maybe as an adult, that I lack motivation, that I don't have any inspiration or confidence or self-esteem or all those things. And that's primarily because I wouldn't have all of my life force energy available to me. The good news about that is we can always go back and reconnect on the timeline where things were actually great before the trauma happened. And in shamanic terms, it's called soul loss when we fragment and lose some of our soul's potential. But we're given a certain potential for the whole of our incarnation in any lifetime. So it's not lost permanently, it's just become disconnected. And so with soul loss, what they would do in shamanic work is they do a soul retrieval. However, you can do that yourself through your own subconscious mind because your body and your subconscious mind knows exactly what happened, why it happened, and how it's suppressing the story simply to keep you safe. None of us suppresses anything other than it's to keep us safe. It's to keep us feeling okay with ourselves. And for example, imagine that a person has a serious car accident and you'll hear them say after, I have no memory of that time. There's a whole blank in my life. And it's simply because there was so much pain and trauma that to be able to survive, they would have to suppress everything connected to that because otherwise it would be too difficult to deal with. So if we're going along happily on our timeline, it doesn't mean life is perfect. It just means that's all we know and we're fine with that. So if we're happily going on our timeline and a catalyst happens at any point in time, it doesn't have to be childhood, but childhood is, very um, evident, it's self-evident really in our stories because, we carry them forward. So if something happens and we get knocked off that timeline and we have somewhat of a detour into other experiences, we can reconnect with that timeline and also access the wisdom that we learned or we gained while we were off course or diverted, so to speak. So a survival mechanism is suppressing trauma, emotions, and they're always going to be the uncomfortable things. We never suppress the happy things, but the things we consider personally negative, we will always suppress. And so at some point in time, we will get to a place where we'll easily get triggered without knowing why. And as I mentioned before, it's because our bodies hold in these sensitive points where we've anchored in and blocked our energy or stopped it from flowing. And we can always reaccess that, never through talking therapies. And I'll tell you why that doesn't work through talking therapies. Because if you imagine that our body represents consciousness, our skin would be the surface layer of consciousness, which is the equivalent of our conscious mind, but it's also an interface for the outer world and our inner world. And the skin is not designed to know anything, or the conscious mind, except how to survive. So it's always focused in the 3D linear world. And it's always about how do we keep the body, mind safe? What am I doing next? Where am I sleeping? Food, warmth, and all that kind of stuff. But the skin, symbolically, as the conscious mind, knows absolutely nothing about the bloodstream or how the body functions or anything of that nature. And so the conscious mind is what we would call the beta mind state. And so when we go into things like alpha and different mind states where we've actually expanded our consciousness, we can access more information that's not readily available to the conscious mind. And so with talking therapies, if, for example, you came to me for, let's say, a talking therapy, I would only be communicating with you from my own conscious mind, which is my own thoughts, my belief, my experience, my perception. But I would know nothing about what your real story is. I might think I do from my experience and everything else, but that's just the conscious mind. So the only way to have and access real change is you have to go into your own subconscious mind, into your own history. And just because your story sounds similar to someone else's doesn't mean that the causes are the same and the outcome's going to be the same. And so we can never generalize. What the conscious mind does is it likes to conceptualize and generalize, but that is never true, because there's other factors that comes into play with individuals. So even though we might share a similar story, individually we have different compositions of archetypal energies, family patterns, soul reasons for having the experience. And so with things like deep meditation, or working with hypnosis, self-hypnosis, or consciousness exploration of whatever type, we can access the bigger picture. And so with our conscious mind, we'll create beliefs like, well, I'm not normal, everyone else is, or I feel different, or something's wrong with me. None of those things are true, because every single one of us is completely perfect, given the circumstances that we've had to experience it. Because those circumstances cause the reactions that make us believe things about ourselves. They're not really true. They're just a reaction and a belief. And so think in terms of the areas in your life that you don't feel comfortable with, that you somehow cannot seem to change. Doesn't matter what you've tried, or what happens with the conscious mind is we're only peeling back layers at a time. So for example, I might think, oh, I've dealt with my mother, and then 6 months later, oh, there's another layer and another layer. It's because the conscious mind can only operate through the layers, because it knows nothing. In fact, it goes to sleep at night when we go to sleep, because it's not designed for anything but 3D physical focus. So it goes to sleep, which means we can have wild and crazy dreams and go along with the dreams. But when we wake up, our conscious mind kicks back in and says, oh my God, wild and crazy dreams. What could it mean? And we try to find meaning. But when we're in the dream, it doesn't have to have meaning, because we're in the experience and it's a normal, natural experience. And so once again, every single thing you think about as your personality, until you do deep self-exploration, they are only coping strategies. And coping strategies are designed by us to keep us safe. Even if to someone else it looks ridiculous. Let's say someone's a drug addict and everyone's like, oh, they got a problem, they're a drug addict. That drug addict is addicted to drugs because something within that allows them to feel safe, that they can cope with life. And so I'll leave you with this thought. Children are not resilient. They fragment, they dissociate, they create beliefs about themselves, and they can live from those. I mean, you can have a CEO having a two-year-old tantrum. What's that about? Well, a part of that CEO is emotionally stuck at too. And so we'll function from these fragmented parts of ourselves rather than knowing what we really want to do. For example, I might not want to have these two-year-old tantrums, but something spontaneously kicks off in me, and that's my response. And so then we can beat ourselves up. Why am I this way? Other people aren't that way. They must think I'm an idiot. Whatever. None of that is true. It's just a response. So most of our life, we are personalizing things, and we're responding from that perception. So imagine that balance is if you were to stand up and turn in a full circle, you would actually be in the center of that circle. Doesn't matter where you do it, you're going to be the nucleus, you're going to be the center. However, our perception of things when we're out of balance, it's like we're on the edge and we cannot see or experience the bigger picture, because where our perception is anchored is on the edge. And it's anchored in a way that it creates trance states. So it's that we go back into the hypnotic state we were that anchored that belief in. So I'll touch on that in another video. See you later.